right, everybody. Good to see everyone again. This is Chaplain Andrew Krasowski with Mother Teresa Hospice, and I'm here with Trish Campbell, our hospice social worker and bereavement coordinator. And today we have another topic. We're doing impact on loss on family relationships. So we're excited to be with you. Hopefully everybody's having a good end of their week. And Trish, it's good to see you again and get another presentation in to educate people.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here, Andrew.
So let's just dive right into it. I think the first topic in this presentation would be grieving as a family and what do families go through during the loss of a loved one.
Okay, well, everyone in the family is sharing a common loss. They've all lost a person in that family. But each person is going to have that experience a little different from one another. Everyone has a unique relationship with that person that differs from the other family members. And there's quite a storm of strong feelings that rage all around you. So you need to understand each other's deep connection between each individual and how you're affected. It's almost like a family tug, like if you envision ropes and you're tugging on the ropes, and it sends the people in the family off balance. So you have some people that are going to be more stable with the loss or more accepting of the loss, and other people who won't be. But it's not something that the family is going to experience equally. Everybody will have their own unique grief experience.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic of grief, and we've addressed this a little bit in our past presentations, is everybody experiences grief in different ways and at different times. And when we really examine grief in families, it's interesting that I think everybody in that family, by and large, is going to experience the different stages of grief. But because they all experience them at different times, sometimes it's difficult for one family member to help another family member because they're both going through different stages. And that, again, is why it's so important to be able to rely on trusted people outside of your family circle, a pastor, a social worker, a trusted friend, to be able to get through those stages without having those your own stages that you're going through when you're doing this. So it's a process, without a doubt. What are some of the grief responses that folks in a family go through that are normal responses that we can expect?
Well, the death of a family member is going to send a rippling effect throughout the entire family. So there's all sorts of feelings that are experienced depending upon the relationship to the deceased, how that person died. Was there any preparation involved with knowing that the death would occur, or was it unexpected or traumatic or tragic? And it depends upon the individual family members' personal coping mechanisms and their emotional maturity. But there are all a wide range of feelings that people will experience. They'll be overwhelmed, sad, angry, depressed, numb, in shock, try to bargain. There's a whole variety of feelings that you may experience, some of them or all of them. People can get stuck in a response. People can get stuck in their anger or in their depression. So that's just an idea of some of the issues that people experience.
Are there any factors that affect a family's coping?
Sure. There's a phrase called differentiation, and it was developed by a well-known psychiatrist in the past named Murray Bowen. And what it is it's the ability to be connected to a family emotionally while maintaining your own autonomy in how you function. In other words, not everybody in the family is going to have the same response the same way of coping, the same maturity level. So what can happen in some families that are undifferentiated is there'll be an expectation that we all have to be in this together. We all have to say the same thing, do the same thing, feel the same thing, experience the same thing. And if you don't, there can be repercussions. So a healthy family is going to be differentiated or separate in terms of their responses. But one that is not differentiated well is going to have a lot of stress. It could come from a surviving parent or another key person in the family that kind of controls things. And if you step out of that expectation in those families that aren't differentiated, you can be ostracized, criticized, reprimanded. And you see this in families. So our goal as clinicians is to try to enable families to look at the differences that people experience in terms of how they view things and how they cope, and that not everyone in the same family of origin is expected to feel and cope the same way. That's not reasonable. It's not healthy.
I know we've talked a lot about this as a team, but when you were talking about that, it kind of brought to mind some of the dynamics with the COVID-19 pandemic and how everybody, we said we're all in this together. But then we had other people that were saying, well, if you don't do it my way, you're not in it together. Well, who are you to say that your way is the way?
That's right.
So a lot of people have things that they have to accomplish on their own, or due to their own health or other dynamics, they have to attack this grief process in a different way than another person. And that doesn't make their way any less commendable, responsible than anybody else in the family. Which brings us to perceptions. And what are some of these perceptions that people actually have, in a family at the loss of a loved one?
All the members of a family are going to perceive the death of their loved one as a threat and a significant challenge. It just depends on the degree which they perceive it. The threat can be greater for some people and more of a challenge than other people in the family. You can see some family members who say they'll be okay. My mother has not been the same. I've lost her when she became more demented and didn't know me. And you may have other family members say, how can you say that? She's not all that different than how she was. So it just depends on how people perceive what's going on. And people in hospice begin to grieve as soon as they know the person is not going to get better. So the loss of who that person was begins then, and that's called anticipatory grief. So you're actually grieving before the person passes away. But again, some family members will recover better, others may struggle. Sometimes that has to do with who the caregiver is. You often see in some families where a spouse is having a more difficult time losing their spouse than the adult children. And that's because of the relationship and their role as a caregiver. And they were married for 50 years and they did everything together, whereas adult children are connected to other people, to their own families. So they can often move on a little more easily than their parent. And then another significant issue is that the roles and responsibilities in the family change quickly, and this can cause major stress and difficulties with adjustment. For example, in most families where there's a couple, one person might manage the finances more than another. The other person might attend to the household, cleaning and cooking and baking and taking care of children and grandchildren. You don't often see in couples, particularly, it being a situation where you're both you both have the same identical roles and responsibilities. Often there's some differences in that regard. But if you haven't had the opportunity or the experience to do something, like even something as simple as using the lawnmower, and that's often more an issue for women. If you've never done it, you can be very stressed just trying to figure out how to start a lawnmower, how much oil goes in it, how do you avoid running over your foot with it. That sounds like a small thing, but that can be a big thing when you add on other roles and tasks that you have to take on now that that person's gone.
Yeah. You spoke a lot about the loss of a parent and a loss, and the difference, I guess you could say, between a loss of a parent and loss of a spouse or a partner. So can you elaborate a little bit for folks on that?
Sure. Any loss that you have is going to present with some different challenges and experiences. So with the loss of a parent, it really puts that adult child or younger child, not so much younger, but with adults, it puts you in a position that you're facing up to your own mortality. And you're losing a key person and how the family related. So you can end up feeling like an orphan. You may feel a sense of responsibility to take care of that surviving parent, which can bring forth some feelings of anger, being overwhelmed. And the family is not going to be the same, as the roles will change. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the major issue is when you lose a parent.
Now, is there a difference on the loss of a spouse or a partner?
There is. That's a different loss, and
Okay.
I referred to that a little bit previously. Often the loss of a spouse or partner is going to create fear, loss of self, purpose, and meaning, particularly if you were a caregiver and you cared for that person for a year or 5 years or 10 years. And there's a different connection between spouses than there are between parents and children. And again, that's often the person that you're closest to, that you spent more time with. You've been married to them, you're connected to them in a different way. There's intimacy there. And the challenges, I think, for a spouse, and I often share this in the grief work that I do, is the goal or the task is to develop a plan, a purpose and a plan. If you don't have any purpose or a plan that you're working on at some point, then you'll have more stress and more difficulty working through the loss of a spouse, because the challenges are going to be living alone, which can be huge. Again, handling daily tasks and problems, finances, household chores, maintenance. You have to adapt to changes in your self-esteem. If you become uncoupled is the word I use. You're not divorced, you're uncoupled. You no longer have that spouse. And then it changes the way you also interact with your extended family and friends. Lots of people talk about trying to reconnect with their friends. Maybe they had a group of friends who were couples and you feel like a third wheel, that you really don't belong. So it's awkward. So those are just a few of the many challenges that widowed spouses or partners experience.
I guess follow up on that, and actually something we see quite often actually in hospice care would be the loss of a sibling, and the stages of grief that kind of go with that.
Oh, I certainly understand this. I lost my brother unexpectedly 2 years ago this past week. And what it does is it puts you in the position where you now recognize your own mortality and that it could happen to you. For example, I'm now the oldest child in the family. So you end up not dwelling on it, but you think, well, there's a good chance I could be the next one to pass away since I'm older. But the loss of someone you were connected to at a young age that knew your parents, that knew your past and present, your childhood, can be quite a challenge. And it can stir up a lot of feelings and thoughts about death, about your own mortality, your faith, all of those sorts of issues. So there certainly is a lot of merit. Sometimes losing a sibling is quite a challenge. Some people think it's less of a loss than losing a parent or a spouse, but people can struggle just as much. It depends on the relationship, how close you were. It's all about the meaning of the loss and the intensity of that relationship.
Yeah, and we've had in hospice work, we've had older siblings that have been caretakers for their brother or sister. So yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that there's definitely a close bond between many siblings, even as they get into adulthood. The next one I would say is obviously one of the tougher ones, which would be the loss of a child.
People will say, who have lost children and who have also lost siblings, parents, or spouses, that it's the most profound, challenging loss ever. And that comes from a place where, as a parent, your lifelong goal or focus is to protect that child, no matter how old they are. They're part of you. You were there during the time of their birth. You went through childhood with them, adolescence, perhaps adulthood. You can certainly, sadly, lose a child at any age, but the loss of a child will create intense helplessness and often hopelessness in parents. And the healing process can be very challenging and can be certainly a longer journey than with other losses. You can also lose present, past, and future hopes and dreams. I've seen that with young people who have died in their teens or 20s. They are not here. They're not going to be here for me to celebrate their adult life with them. They won't get married. They won't have children. They won't have a profession. Those are all very difficult issues to cope with. And lots of the feelings will be many volatile emotional swings, disorientation, emotional numbness, inability to sleep. You can have significant loss of appetite, loss of short-term memory. Many parents will actually question, are these normal grief responses or am I going crazy? Because they seem so unusual and so intense. But many times they're normal responses, even though they don't feel like that. It's what you have to go through to get to the other side of the healing process. But it can take a significant amount of time. And again, it can certainly depend upon the age of the person and how they died. Not to minimize any loss, that one type of loss is greater than another, but there are different challenges with an expected loss of a child through an illness than a tragic loss, like an accident or something even worse. Murder, suicide are probably the most intense types of losses of children to work through. So what you try to do too in a family is you try to form some kind of balance, they call it homeostasis, when the whole family system is disrupted. And that becomes another task for the family members that can often involve incorporating new roles in the family and learning new things.
One of the things when you were kind of talking about that, I was thinking about that I don't think a lot of people think about is, we've had patients that are in their 90s and 100s and have lost their children in their 70s, and I think I've dealt with patients that we've taken care of that have also experienced that sense of loss, even though their child was an adult senior citizen. So that doesn't. It's not just, we always talk about losing a child. It's not always children in the traditional sense of the word. A parent always is going to have that love of their child, no matter what the age. And I just thought that was important to point out in this presentation.
That's certainly true. I've had patients that were over 100 years old and their children were in their 80s, and it's no less difficult for them to lose their mother or father
Yeah,
than it would be if they were 10, 20 years younger.
yeah,
Sometimes when your parent lives to be over 100, you just don't think it might happen. They've
right,
lived so long, you're
right.
not expecting them to die. They're still here and they're still vibrant, and they're still independent and doing things. So it can come actually as a shock, especially if they decline very quickly or die very suddenly.
Yeah, I remember as a teenager, I remember my dad always using the phrase that they outlived everybody, and there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we see a lot of folks that get into their 90s and 100s, and they outlive their children, they outlive a lot of their friends. So obviously, when the funeral time comes, it's a small gathering because a lot of their support system, a lot of the people that were important in their lives are no longer around.
That's certainly true, Andrew. I've seen um, patients in hospice who've lost all of their children. Um, and they can actually have some relief that they're terminally ill because now's the time that that they find they can be able to let go and join them
Yeah.
and not have to live any longer with that deep sadness. It's pretty difficult to imagine, having your children die before you. Kind of the natural order of things is that you don't bury your children, they bury you.
Hmm. Speaking of children, again, a difficult topic. Can you address children's grief?
The loss of someone when you're a child is really dependent upon your developmental age and the maturity of the child and their inability or ability to comprehend death. So for the most part, children don't really appreciate or comprehend death as final the way adults do until about the ages of 7 or 8. Now, some children can be more mature and more perceptive before that age, but um, children need to know need to have simple responses, honest but simple, to what happened, and they need the security when they're younger than 7 or 8, knowing who will be there to take care of them, and they need their routines maintained. Whereas children over the age of 8 are usually able to sit down and have some sort of conversation with a parent or a grandparent or an older sibling about what happened. But you'll see children cope in many different ways. Sometimes children will talk to an adolescent friend, but they won't talk to their parents about the loss of someone. And that's okay as long as they're connected to somebody. It could even be a teacher or a pastor or priest that they feel more comfortable with. But being there for your children, keeping that door to the conversation open, sharing your own feelings honestly, always being available, always being tuned in to how they're doing is what's most important.
I also think a lot of folks don't understand. I think we've touched upon this a number of times. How valuable during the stages of grief that sometimes a trained therapist can be getting through this. And that spans from children all the way up to adults. But sometimes just sitting with somebody who's a trained grief counselor, a psychoanalyst, a psychiatrist, psychologist, we're not talking about going to them to receive medication. We're talking about just going to a trained professional who's able to make sense of some of the feelings that you're going through. How valuable we've heard in our profession that has been for so many folks, just to make kind of sense of what they're feeling and knowing they're not alone.
That's a really good point, Andrew. Even if it's only one session, what a trained therapist, a really good grief counselor can tell you is, are these feelings normal, or is some of what I'm experiencing and feeling not normal? Do I need medicated? Do I need something else? And that can be very reassuring to know that, yes, I have these intense feelings, I'm having these difficulties coping, but this is a normal part of the grief process. Whereas there might be other feelings or behaviors that are looked upon as not normal or abnormal, but the therapist can sort out the difference and educate and share with that person. But it can be very comforting to know at some point I'll be okay, or to know that I do need some medication, I do need an antidepressant, or I do need more intensive counseling, I do need to see that person, that therapist, once a week to get over the hump, so to speak. But there are really good people out there, and we have resources to direct people to appropriate counselors.
Yeah, and I guess the final thing I would say, something that I've dealt with in my profession as a chaplain, unfortunately, as well as my hobby of coaching. If you're ever feeling any sense of suicidal thoughts during any of the coping, the grief process, please talk to somebody about this, whether it be a family member or friend immediately, or a trained professional. You know, there's so many folks that have unfortunately taken their own life because they feel that they're alone. So we highly encourage you, if you ever have any of those thoughts, please talk to somebody immediately and get the help that you need. And I'll also be including some of that information for folks that might be watching this presentation, that some resources they can use to tap into to get some additional help.
Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. That's really important to know that somebody is available and cares to listen. We don't want anybody to take any drastic measures. We would really prefer absolutely that people reach out and contact someone.
Absolutely.
Contact us, and we can
Yep.
put that person in touch with someone. That's
Absolutely.
part of what we do.
Well, Trish, I'm going to end with a little prayer. What will be our next topic that we'll be covering, so I can tell folks about?
Our third session in this 4-part series, Andrew, will be the challenges of ongoing loss. So when you lose someone and you go through the grief journey, you sadly can encounter other losses. They may be deaths, they may be other losses that are significant, divorce, separation, loss of finances, loss of your home, loss of your health. So we will be talking about how those impact the grief process.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to end with a little prayer. God our Father, we ask you to pour out your blessings on all your people, particularly here in the United States as we prepare for a presidential election. We ask you that all people put God before anything else, and that we know that when God is at the forefront of everything we do, that we can make the right choices and that we can help the people that we need to help. We pray in a special way for the people who are going through a loss of a loved one. We know that you are there for them, Lord, and we ask you in a special way to continue to touch their hearts, know that to allow them to know that you are with them every step of the way and that you never forget your people. And we ask this all through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
And we ask all of you, if you ever have any questions about any of the programs we have to offer, or you want more information about palliative care, about hospice care, that you please check us out at MotherTeresaHospice.com. We are one of the highest hospice providers in Western Pennsylvania, according to Medicare.gov. So that's the government website that does a survey of all the hospices in the entire country. And we are really proud that we have been able to set ourselves apart as one of the top hospice providers in our area. So we will see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you.
Are you having a tough time making the best decision for your mom, dad, or loved one during this difficult time? Hospice care may be the right fit for your family. Mother Teresa Hospice has been faithfully serving the Pittsburgh region since 2002. We have been recognized as one of the top hospice providers in the region by Medicare.gov. We know it's a tough decision to make, but we are here to help you. Please contact us today at MotherTeresaHospice.com.